let's talk about the survey. Now, at the very top you see, what does Columbia think about the boulevard? The boulevard being James Campbell. To the left, the very first thing there says, when asked to describe James Campbell Boulevard as it exists today, the community responded with the following one-word descriptions. Now, we let people say whatever they wanted, so long as they kept it to one word to describe James Campbell Boulevard. And a lot of people said some stuff that was actually very good, some very complimentary stuff. But the most common word that was used by people was the word congested. Unbidden to us not suggesting any words to them, we had several people who just on their own separately said congested to describe James Campbell Boulevard. The second word, and again, this comes from the community, completely unsolicited from us. The second word that people used to describe was ugly. And we found that a little bit strong, of course. We were a bit surprised to hear that, but congested and ugly were the most common words used to describe the corridor by the community, those who participated in the survey. Now, when asked to describe what the community wants the boulevard to be tomorrow, hopefully as a product of this plan, the most common word that we saw was attractive, followed by thriving. And I think what that says is people see the need for beautification, obviously. There's the word attractive. But a lot of people said the word thriving, which I think is pretty interesting because it shows a desire to see business really booming there. See it beautiful, but also see it thrive from the standpoint of business, thrive from the standpoint of the community as well. And so these were our most common words. Now, in talking about priorities, you see the next little middle section here talking about the top 3 priorities. Well, they speak for themselves. We gave people a choice of 6 different options, 6 different options. Out of the 6 options that you're going to see, which are the 3 most important things that we should focus on? People said, number 1, we should focus on traffic. That goes pretty consistently with the word congested. So we need to focus on traffic during the charrette for the rest of the week. As we have our engineers, our architects, our planners, we need to focus on traffic. Number 2, we need to focus on redevelopment. I think that fits very nicely with the idea of thriving. We need to focus on how to take some of these empty spaces and make them full again. And then finally, again, this kind of goes hand in hand with what people said in the survey. We want to see beautification as the 3rd top priority. So traffic, redevelopment, beautification. Does this reflect your values? We have this meeting tonight to show these results and make sure that this reflects what you feel as well. And if not, we need to know, because tomorrow night the work really starts. Pen starts getting put to paper, drawings, sketches, plans start being made. Now, going on to the next, really the last section over here, it's titled "Can't Get No Satisfaction," to quote from the old Stones song. We asked people how satisfied they were about certain aspects of James Campbell. Now, the red circles that you see there are where people said they were dissatisfied. They were, as a whole, dissatisfied about the way James Campbell handles traffic. I don't think that's a surprise. They were dissatisfied with the amount of stores or the general shopping experience. They were dissatisfied with the quality and the appearance of the corridor. Again, this is all sounding pretty consistent. They were, however, satisfied with the amount of parking spaces that are available. And here's the funny thing about that particular question. If you look at that question, now this chart is a little bit hard to read perhaps, but if you look at that, there's a green circle that says 37% are satisfied. Right next to it is a blue circle. Now that blue circle represents those who really don't have an opinion. They're not satisfied or dissatisfied. 34% of people were neither satisfied or dissatisfied. So with all the parking that there is on James Campbell Boulevard for every single store, you still have a good number of people that, while are satisfied, almost the same amount of people that really are not satisfied or are not dissatisfied. They don't really have any concern, which is curious because we thought that this would be the one that people would overwhelmingly say they're satisfied with. But if you ever try to find a parking spot close to the door on any place in James Campbell, you probably feel a little frustration. That's hard to do. Moving along, most people were dissatisfied with the amount of restaurants and entertainment. most people were dissatisfied with the way the corridor has been planned, and this particular one got the most negative amount of responses. Most people were also very dissatisfied, not just dissatisfied, but very dissatisfied. And then finally, this is one that I really love because it speaks a lot to the community, a community that's sort of a show me community. We feel like we're doing some good things with this plan, but a lot of people are reserving their judgment until they see the final goods, and I think that's really to be commended. When asked of how satisfied people are with the way the city is approaching this plan, people on the whole say they don't have an opinion yet. They haven't seen enough to make a judgment, and I think that's the challenge for us working on the plan for the rest of this week. Is we've got to show you some things starting tonight and then ending on Tuesday of next week. We've got to show you things that will make you say you're very satisfied. And if we can't show you those things, then that says a lot about our effort. But we think we can, so long as we have your involvement. So finally, two more things. Columbia is still great. Even when asking all these questions about James Campbell Boulevard, we also asked about quality of life, and over half of the people who took this survey are very satisfied with the quality of life in Columbia. So even though people have some issues with the corridor, it says that the city itself is still providing great service and is of great benefit to you. That is very helpful. And then finally, this is the biggest question of all that we've asked everyone. We've asked everyone, can the boulevard survive? We know how the boulevard was built for the past 40 years. Can it survive another 40 years the way it currently is without any changes? Overwhelmingly, 67% of the people said no. And we have some people who said yes, but they sort of couched their statement by saying it will just limp along. So overwhelmingly, it seems like a lot of people feel like this cannot survive, this corridor, without some action, some improvements taken. What are those actions? What are those improvements? This next week defines it all. It starts tonight, and it starts now with this presentation from Brian.
It's interesting for me tonight to be here and see all of you. I feel like I know you all already. Normally on our projects, we don't do nearly this much kind of upfront stuff. We're not able to engage the community as much as we are here because for those who I've met already, I just live up the road in Franklin. Most of our projects are all over the country, and so I just don't have the opportunity to be this hands-on. So this is kind of neat, and I really enjoy it because we're all about relationships. Now, what's happening now? This is the charrette. Everybody keeps asking about what's the charrette, and so we're kicking off. This is the opening presentation. I'm going to talk through a bunch of big ideas of not ideas for what to do, but concepts, theories, principles that are most of them are universal. They're time tested throughout the history of civilization. And they've been proven to be effective in creating habitats for humans, for people, that they enjoy. And so I'm going to go through this, and then we're going to quickly get to question and answers. And then after that, the maps on your tables here, we're actually going to break out and have a team member or a city staff member at each table, and you guys are going to start helping us put the first pens to paper because we haven't drawn anything. As much as I've met you and talked to you and heard from you, and we've been taking notes and all that, we still haven't drawn anything. And so this is really the beginning of the process. So as I keep shouting from the hills, you guys were one of 62 cities chosen out of 800 who submitted for this grant from HUD, and so now we have to operate under these 6 livability principles, looking at providing more transportation choices, promoting equitable, affordable housing, enhancing economic competitiveness, supporting existing communities, coordinating, leveraging federal policies, and valuing neighborhoods and communities. And all of those things sound pretty reasonable and easy to comply with. So, what is the study area? That's a question people keep asking us over and over. And so here you can see in orange is the James Campbell Boulevard, and we are looking officially from Carmack down to Industrial, which is somewhere over here. But for us, from a planning perspective, we look so big picture at things. We don't really care about study boundaries per se, because what we need to do is see how James Campbell relates to things like your downtown and how they can work together instead of against each other, and then kind of what happens as it moves out of town in both directions, and where you have interstate connections and all of those things, because what we're looking at, as we'll talk about some through this presentation, is how are you going to be bringing people to the city, and so that starts to become important to look regionally as well. So what the heck's a charrette? Everybody says. So this is a charrette, and so we've co-opted this French word. It means little cart, and so this guy was the professor, and he would take the cart around, and all of the art students would put their pieces of art on the cart, and they would then be feverishly working to finish, like I was doing here, to finish the presentation. And so it's really used to describe this intense creative effort that happens in a condensed period of time. And so we're going to go through, this is the schedule for the entire charrette. Here we are right now on Wednesday. And don't worry, we have handouts, so you don't have to write all this down or anything. And so this is tonight the opening presentation and hands-on community workshop. Some of my team is already here. Some of them are still on their way. And then the rest of them will get here tomorrow. And then we're going to go out and tour the area, the region, the most loved places around. We're going to look at your competition nearby and really start to get a sense of what's working, what things are looking great. And then also especially touring around the city, so we can understand what is the essence of Columbia, so that we make sure that everything we do is continuing that on rather than doing something superficial and changing everything. Here on Friday we have a series of meetings with different topics. Elected and appointed officials, public services, fire, EMS, police, infrastructure and transportation, landowners, developers, and business owners. And each of these is at a certain time and has a specific topic, but if you're not a business owner, you can still come to that meeting. All of this process is open to the public. This is just to kind of give us a specific topic so people can come and say, I'm particularly interested in that, let's talk about it. But anything goes at those meetings. We talk about whatever comes up, so feel free to come participate in that. Then on Saturday, we're going to have an intermediate pin-up, because while all of this stuff is going on, the team is actually drawing while I'm having these meetings. And so things are happening. And so we're going to say, here's what we've been thinking so far. Here's what we've done so far. Give us some feedback, because we don't want to just head down a path that isn't the right path. So you're going to tell us if we're on the right path. And then here we kind of, we don't shut down the studio per se, but we don't have any more meetings, because here we have to start moving into production mode. We're still designing, but we need to produce things so that by the time we come around on Tuesday night at the closing presentation, we have the master plan done, the entire master plan done. We have the renderings from the artists. We have the transportation engineers' reports, and all of those things are going to happen between now and then, and it will be hopefully surprising to you guys that we're able to get all that done. And then we will, it's not the end though, even though we call that the closing presentation. The plan then still has to go through the normal approval process, where we go and submit it to the Planning Commission and the City Council, and the citizens all have the opportunity to come and give their feedback and say how much they love the plan at City Council and Planning Commission. So that's that. And then staying involved. We know that everyone can't be here tonight, obviously, and throughout the process, people will not be able to come sometimes. So we have a Facebook page in which we've been posting and will continue to post what's happening each day, designs and ideas and videos and things like that. And then there's also this thing called the Mind Mixer, where you can go on and give your input on particular topics, and people will give feedback on what you said. And then we have these surveys that Norman referred to we've been filling out that have all been very helpful. Now, James Campbell. Who's James Campbell? This is a picture that we got from the Campbell brothers, and this is James Campbell here. And I thought it was so cool. It's not, just a picture of, a family portrait or whatever. He's looking through the binoculars, and he's looking off in the distance. And can you imagine, okay, as much as, we've gotten the oh, it's not so beautiful on the boulevard and all that stuff, can you imagine the vision that it took for him to go out there and look at these farms and say, I'm going to put this boulevard here, right? Now, he did it at a time when, urban design and all of those things had really transformed itself into a different mode. And so he built the, kind of the cutting edge of the time, but he was still forward thinking. And you can imagine the same thing happened when the founders of Columbia came out and just surveyed the land and laid out the grid and built the courthouse and the downtown square and all of that stuff. So for me, it's really kind of cool. I get into this kind of stuff and seeing this. And it's inspirational, because now we are the ones looking through the binoculars into the future, 50, 100 years. And tomorrow, don't forget tomorrow, everybody keeps saying this, we want stuff soon, not in a long time. So we're dealing with that too, don't worry. So we've done, and the city's done, and we've helped with doing some demographic analysis. We did an economic analysis, which was presented last night, and all that will be available. But what we found is there are some missing populations in the city. The younger populations are missing, so people from 35 to 45 are particularly absent. And coincidentally, Spring Hill has gained a bunch of people in that same group in the past several years. So there may be some correlation, but we've also seen that there's some economic stuff going on here. There's some higher than normal unemployment, those kind of issues that are really important to address. And we've also started to see what are some of the assets. Now, getting into the big ideas, the theories, well, you see pretty much anywhere we go in the country, we work for private developers as well as for cities. And so sometimes we're going and submitting a plan on behalf of a developer. And nearly every city you go to, this is what you see: stop sign for development, builders fear law puts skids on growth, and everybody's saying, we don't want any of that development. We don't even know what it is. We just don't want it because it's going to be crummy. We're sure of it, And so you see they come out with the signs and they say, not here, not now, not ever. And these people are known as NIMBYs, not in my backyard. Everybody talks about that. And now here's the thing. They're not just picking on developers. Developers have come by the reputation, rightly, that most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the times, when you go and there was a farm field or there was a woodlands, and instead of, all of a sudden you take that down and you get 100 Oaks, or there used to be 100 Oaks, now it's a mall and it's called 100 Oaks. Remember the 100 Oaks? It's not as great as the 100 Oaks were. It's convenience and you have some of the things you like. And so there's usually not a fair trade-off, whereas historically when they built Columbia from the beginning, people were excited about growth, excited about development. They said, oh my God, this is great. More people coming. That means maybe we'll be able to get a new courthouse. Maybe we'll be able to get more restaurants. Maybe we'll be able to get an opera house one day or whatever. So the more growth and development, the better off people were. And so times have really, really changed because of what's happened over the years. Here's an example of a statue. This is the guy here. And this guy's name is George Merrick. And George is a developer. See, he's got blueprints in his hands here. He's got his jacket over his shoulder because it was a hot day when he was out looking through binoculars. He is a developer, but he's also known as the town founder of Coral Gables, which is this incredible area around Miami, historic. Everybody loves it. And the citizens loved him so much for the neighborhood he created for them that they erected the statue in front of their city hall in honor of their developer. Can you imagine that happening today? That doesn't happen today. Developers usually come in, they develop the land, and that's the last time you see them, and they move on, and that's that. Again, there's an exception to every rule. Now, there's some other things going on in the world that are we have to think about, regardless of what you think about global warming, and we'll call these swimsuits. Okay, because I know we're in the South and we need to be proper, and so these are swimsuits here, and so they're talking about global warming, and then the gas prices going up and down and up and down, and a lot of people say that the current whole dependence on fossil fuels is not sustainable, and we're going to have to change things one day, whether we like it or not. So now, like I said, we work all over the country, and every place we go, no matter if we're in the North or the South, which is interesting, people say, I say, what do you want? What are you looking for in a community? They say, oh, I want Mayberry. I want Mayberry. I want Andy and Opie, and even if they, could care less about fishing or whatever. And somehow something in Mayberry on the Andy Griffith Show touched America, and everybody's into that, right? Now, I said, well, what is it? I'm a planner. What the heck about Mayberry? And so I went and I found this. This is actually the back lot in Hollywood where they shot this. This is Mayberry. Here's Andy's house here. Here's the courthouse. Here's the hotel, the church, all that from 1965. Now, the thing that you'll notice is this could be any historic town, a small town in America. It's historic. It's laid out in this traditional pattern. It's not a suburban neighborhood. So it's really interesting to study that for me. Now, what they're getting, while they're saying we want Mayberry, they're getting something else. They're being given, not because they want it necessarily. This is the kind of thing you see. You start to see these signs that says good luck, and can't go straight, can't go back, can't turn left, can't turn right, wrong way. What in the world? What's going on here? Okay, so this is what you're getting. This is a typical subdivision in America today. Instead of Mayberry, which people say they really want, this is what they're getting. Now, that said, for those of you who live in a neighborhood just like this, because I know the majority of you in here probably do, because that's the majority of what's built in America, I grew up in a neighborhood like this. This was my life, and it was great. It's a perfectly reasonable and acceptable way to live. However, it's not the only way to live, and it may not be your favorite way to live, and you just may not know the difference. Now, that said, though, there are some consequences of that type of development. Here you see the cul-de-sac. You might be, the zoom in here is this. And here was the heritage farm. And you can imagine that its days are numbered because the next cul-de-sac is coming right here and it's gone. And you lose that bit of history, bit of character. And you trade it, once again, you trade it for the cul-de-sac. Is that a fair trade? Will people be happy about that? And so then people come out with the signs and they say no more of that. And then this is what you end up having to do when you have this type of suburban development, because as I'll show you in a minute, all these lanes, people think they're necessary, the transportation engineers think they're necessary, and you get a mess like this. And obviously, hopefully this is not a future for Columbia. Hopefully this is really just what you see in places like Atlanta, but it is it's seen all around the country, and it's a mess. Now, it's gotten to the point where this is actually this comic that's written, and look at these kids. These kids are on their cul-de-sac here, and they look totally confused and bewildered and like, what's going on here? You know why? Because they're lost. Which of these houses is mine? They all look the same. They're all the same size, and so you have to kind of find your way around, and it's now being satired, the lifestyle. Now, zooming in and seeing what does it look like on the ground, and so obviously this isn't Columbia. You guys don't have palm trees. But pretty much the rest of it could be here or it could be anywhere in America. This is what highways look like all over the country. And so nobody's better or worse. Now, these guys are doing a particularly bad job of cutting their grass and things like that. And so, it makes the suburban existence look particularly gross. But let's take a different example. Well manicured, all of that. They've got a sign ordinance, so all of these signs are about the same height, and they're set back appropriately. Now, what you may see here in the front yard of Burger King, it says Beautification Award. Okay, the same beautification award that's given for Courthouse Square or whatever. So they get a beautification award, and I'm thinking, my God, what did Burger King do better than McDonald's? Was it the pansies? Was it the Edward Scissorhands topiaries here on the bushes? Like, what did they do to get that beautification award? And if our standards have now been adjusted and set so low that we're giving beautification awards for this, where are we going? So it's something to think about. Now, here's what we've heard about Columbia. Okay, so I'm just reporting this. Okay, the thing that's interesting though, and let me tell you what I've heard. So people around here don't like change. And the funny thing is, this isn't a joke. This is actually another city, and these people are picketing. This is like not even a historic photo. They just did it in black and white to make it look more dramatic. But they were really upset because Comcast or whatever is going to put in some new boxes, the metal boxes where they have all their equipment and stuff. And they were, oh, those boxes are so ugly. So they came up with this campaign, keep the internet slow and all this. So it's like, it was pretty funny. So we've heard things like that about Columbia not wanting to have things change. And then here, cave people, citizens against virtually everything, What else have we heard? Muletown. Everybody's talking about the mule, and we've heard that the people who live in Columbia are about over the whole mule thing. We've heard some people like it a lot, but we've also heard from people from in Franklin and Nashville and elsewhere who love the mules. They love mule days, and they come and they patronize and spend lots of money. And did I see somewhere that there's like 100,000 people or something that come here over 200,000 over 4 days? That's a big deal. So anyway, I was going to embed a video in here. I had this mule saying hee-haw, hee-haw. It's very funny, but I thought you guys might not like it, so I decided not to do it. Now the good news is about this thing with the change and all of that, being afraid of change. No one actually said, I don't want change. Everybody said Columbia doesn't like change. So it's like this sort of internal reputation you have amongst yourselves, you and your neighbors. You think your neighbor doesn't want change and they think you don't want change. But nobody said to me, I don't want change. Maybe you're just all being polite, and that's the polite way to say I don't want change. I know this. I have a friend of a friend who doesn't want change. But anyway, so we'll get to the bottom of that, and we'll see once we start making some proposals who wants change and who doesn't. Now, the lifestyle that I was showing you in these images thus far is what's termed as suburban sprawl. That's what you hear about in the newspapers and all the ills and woes of suburban sprawl. Well, we're not going to make judgments about suburban sprawl. I just want to explain to you what it is, because you probably have seen it listed somewhere in the media. The elements of suburban sprawl are as follows, and they are always separated. The idea is that you want one use to be separated from the next use so that the two never shall meet. And the idea there these days is to protect property values, because two incompatible uses near each other have a really negative impact on property values. Now, when they first came up with this idea of separating things, it's because if you were next to the factory, it killed you. Okay, and now we've kind of morphed this into, it's like a marketing ploy and a sales ploy that you use in the real estate industry, not injury, excuse me. So here it is. So this is a school pod. So everything's separated in these pods. This is a school pod where kids are schooled. And most schools today, you can see the edge of this one a bit, look about like they're designed by prison architects or an insecticide factory maybe. And they have chain link fence with barbed razor wire along the top, because we're protecting the kids, right? Yes, we are. On the other hand, what kind of damage is that doing to the kids and living and existing in that environment and trying to learn there? So here's the shopping pod, and everyone knows this because I'm sure you all use them. And that's what a shopping pod looks like. Here's a housing pod. With the suburban cul-de-sacs we talked about. Here's a work pod. These are the ubiquitous office parks that you can see, especially as you're driving into to Franklin and Cool Springs and those areas. And some of you may work in those office pods. And here is a multifamily housing pod. We call this the train wreck apartment complex. Looks like train cars. They've all crashed into each other and they're just scattered out there, surrounded all by parking here. And they have some green space, and you're going to play there, of course, in the middle of the parking lot. Now, I said that the idea is to separate these uses, right? But at some point, there's the seam where two uses come near each other. Now, what we do today, and is required in nearly every zoning ordinance and around the country, is we buffer. So here's the shopping pod, and here's the housing pod, and we have the buffer. And not only is there a vegetated buffer, the trees and all that, there's also, if you look closely, a fence and probably a ditch there. And so we definitely don't want these two things to touch each other. Now, the consequence of that is, if you live in this house here and you need to go buy something here, instead of walking 35 seconds, you have to get in your car and drive out of your cul-de-sac, come out here, get on the collector road, come around, get on this one, and clog it up while you're there, causing traffic, and then come shop here, and then go back home and repeat the process. Okay? So by the form of development here, it is causing the traffic problem. Because not only do you have to come out and get on these collector roads, but each of these collector roads, everything has to pour onto it, because typically there aren't other roads running parallel to it. And so you have problems that are caused. Now, historically, traditionally, this is what we would do when we had uses that were not similar. Okay, so here's the square. So imagine your courthouse square. And here you have shops on the ground floor, and people would live above. Some people actually want to live right there, right next to it. And you're only buffered by the floor, okay? So here's that. And then some people, it's not for them to live right over the shop. They want to live close, but not exactly next to it. So you go up the street here, and here's my house. And it's super convenient, and I still only have to walk, 1 minute or less to get here. Some people, they want to be even further out, and you get the idea. So here, but you can still walk, and here maybe you have to ride your bike. But there's no buffering because the form of these things, the layout of the master plan, the form of the buildings are actually compatible one with the next. The use is irrelevant because you know what? This may be a bakery today on the ground floor. It once was a coffee shop. Maybe it was a tax office at some point, an attorney then. Over time, things change. So the use, designing something for a specific use at that time is short-sighted and causes problems in the end and creates this condition so that this guy can't walk there. Infrastructure. We're going to be talking a lot about that throughout this process since we're focusing on a road in particular, but not just the road, let me be clear. It's everything kind of outside the road too, the properties, the private land and things like that. But here you see, this is just a road. This isn't a major arterial or collector road or highway. This is just a road between this apartment complex and the next. But look at this. Can you imagine how many of these cars you could actually stick across here? Probably 8. Maybe 7, maybe 8. But this is incredibly expensive. It's also incredibly environmentally unsustainable because what happens is this is all impervious, which means the water cannot go through it. That means the water has to then go across and down into the storm sewer, so you have to have a big giant storm sewer, et cetera, et cetera. So it costs the city and the taxpayers money to make these roads super extra wide. And then it also happens to be not what humans want to be around. People want streets like this. See these kids here riding their skateboards where their moms told them not to, right? So no self-respecting kid rides a skateboard on the sidewalk. Probably not even supposed to for the code, but this is what kids do. And you know why they do it? Because the street is designed safely. Cars go slow. There are cars parked on the street here. There are street trees. All of these things start to create spatial enclosure. And psychologically, it makes people feel good about walking there. And so we'll talk more about walkability in a minute, but this starts to introduce that idea. Now, one of the things that when we go to a city, okay, so once you get past saying no development, we don't want any, get out of town, you bums, and you take your picket signs and put them away because you realize it's going to happen no matter what. Something's going to happen. People start saying, we want open space. If you're going to come here, we're going to take a pound of flesh out of you. We want open space, and the more the better. And everybody knows open space is good, right? Well, here's what happens. The developer says, okay, fine. I have a 40% requirement in the city to do open space. There you go. You can have what's left over. You take the stuff in the back. There's some leftover land, and people come out here and they say, we're going to go throw the Frisbee. Am I going to be arrested for being a peeping Tom? Am I trespassing? I don't know if this is public or private or what's going on. Whereas open space used to, traditionally and historically, was designed in a meaningful way to be the focus of something, to be the middle of the heart of things. So this square here would be, you could imagine, this is where every parade in town starts, every festival starts, whatever. There's no parades going on here. This is about the same number of acres here and here. Now what happens here is that this is left over. This actually makes all of the property around it more valuable. All the buildings face it. It becomes a generator of real estate value. So open space. And so when you ask for open space, don't just say open space. Say we want parks, squares, plazas, greens. Be very specific because these things, there are specific types of open space. Now, here you go. This is a thoroughfare, a boulevard, probably. And in fact, this is the postcard put out by the Virginia Beach Chamber of Commerce. It says here, becoming a showcase, Virginia Beach Boulevard, Phase 1 celebrated. Okay? And they call this their town center. Now, what you see is there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lanes across. Okay? That's a lot of traffic that's going to go through there. Now, at this moment, you notice the pavement's all really dark because it's new, so it's not very congested. Give it a month, because once people know there's a new wide road, they're going to come drive on it, right? And so then it starts self-perpetuating, and it gets worse and worse, and so you add another lane, and then it fills up, and on and on and on. Now, here's the thing, though. In Virginia Beach, they didn't leave everything to the wayside. They said, we want plenty of parking, obviously. They said, we have a tree ordinance. They got 4 trees and 6 shrubs, okay? Beautification, right? Really important. They said, we want to provide and accommodate for pedestrians, so they put a sidewalk. Can you imagine walking down the sidewalk next to 12 lanes of traffic on one side and this sea of asphalt on the other? On a day like today, you might not even make it from here to there. You might have to be rescued. And then what happens is the people driving here, they say, oh man, that's too bad. Look, that unfortunate person having to walk down the highway, right? And so they stop and ask you, do you need some help, sir? Can I help you? Which is, not what's a good thing. Now, this is also in Virginia. This is Arlington. Now, what you can see here is, if you add up the lanes, it's actually the same amount of traffic can flow through here as can through here. Here is a civic space with civic buildings on it. Here you can see the water as an amenity. There's parking here in these blocks internally. There's structured parking here. There's on-street parking throughout. There are trees, and actually a lot of trees. There's street trees and trees on the private lots. And there are all kinds of things that make this an incredible environment to be in, and this an environment that is lacking to be in. This is safer for traffic, carries lots of traffic. This is not safe because people have all of these conflict points with all of these different lanes of traffic, etc. So it's quite a contrast between the two town centers. Now, infrastructure, we mentioned that a minute ago. This slide hardly needs any explanation. But as we're talking about laying out things like storm sewers, we know how to do it better than this. You see somebody calculated this on a computer, and they said, oh, here's what we need. We need an inlet this big, and they figured out that they wanted the sidewalk up here, and they didn't quite put all the pieces together, and so you end up with this poor lady about to mess up her new red shoes and scuff them on the curb. And so what we want to do as we go through this process is look at some ways to minimize some of this infrastructure and do it in a more sustainable way, but not only that, but in a way that works for pedestrians and walkability as well. The architecture is somewhat important. Architectural style is pretty variable wherever we go in the country. Some places want very hip and contemporary and new stuff. Other places want very traditional. It just depends on the preferences. Now, while style is not all that important, certain elements of buildings are. And so what you have here is the buildings on the right, left, whichever side you're facing. These houses say cars live here, okay? These are actually the front of these houses. This is not an alley. There's a front door right in there somewhere, but this says cars live here. This house, on the other hand, says people live here, right? So it's got a little fence that says this is a private lot, just so you know. So this is the public realm, and then private realm's on the other side of the fence. There are windows so you can see lights turning off and on and people doing things, and a door where you can enter and you go through the gate. And the parking is allocated and provided in the rear. And so these two different types of the design of these buildings is not about the style, it's about what they're saying to the public. And people do not like to walk past this situation, and they love walking past this situation. Zoning. We'll talk about zoning a little bit again, because it's something that is going to be an important part of this process and ongoing into the future as you guys are exploring some new ways to do zoning. Now, on this side of the screen, you see the Walmart here. And when you look at this and compare it to downtown Columbia, or you compare it to this place here, you think, surely something must have happened where these guys have broken some rules. They slipped through the cracks somehow. This is bizarre. This looks so different. Downtown looks so different. But what you see is that the zoning, the Walmart is actually totally behaving by the rules. This is what is required by the zoning in nearly every city in the country. And what you can't see, because this isn't taken from the far edge of the parking lot, because you probably wouldn't be able to tell it was a Walmart if we're that far away, is that there's a lot more parking going on. And we've heard in Columbia, right now you guys require more parking even than Walmart wants. And so that's pretty interesting. All of the things here are perfectly legal. And in this image here, most of the things you see are illegal. You can't do them in most cities in America. You can't have people living above shops. You can't have cars backing out here into the street here, or even parallel parking in most cases. You end up having all kinds of issues here, and it's all based on zoning. And so zoning reform starts to become really important as you're exploring these things. Now, here we talked about incompatible uses a minute ago, and this is an example, okay? So this convenience store, because that's what that is a beloved neighbor. These are residential units, a row house and then other houses next to it on both sides. So this is the only moment of commercial activity on this block. They love this thing here. These houses are more valuable, than other houses farther away because of the convenience of having that there. It's a beloved neighbor. On the other hand, if this goes in next to your house right there, it has the effect on your property values as if you just put a small nuclear reactor right there, right? This is, it's the same stuff. They've got the same orange juice, the same loaf of bread, they've got the same, slushies, whatever, but the physical form of not only the building, but you notice the way that it relates to the street, because the street's way over here, and so it is set back from the street with parking lot in front, and all of these things. Now here, some brave souls actually took their bikes to the 7-Eleven, and that was good that they did that. But this has a negative impact on property values, and this doesn't. So it's not about use; it's about form. So we keep thinking about that. One of the things that the suburban development model has done is actually begun to separate people by income levels. Okay, so here you see these guys live in a house in their subdivision here. Let's say these are $300,000 houses because they have palm trees and stuff around it, so it's probably expensive. And these houses are the $200,000 houses. And then over here, these are the condos that cost $100,000. Each one separated from the next with gates and guards and security, or supposed security, right? Because the $200,000 guys might siege the $300,000 guys, right? They might attack and try to take over. When in actuality, what happens is this guy works in the office next to this guy. They know each other. They're friends, right? But what's going on in suburbia is there's so little to offer now. In the real estate world, they've got to come up with something to sell you. So we sell exclusivity. We sell, this is expensive. This is more expensive than that. And all of a sudden now, that's what they're hanging their hat on. And so it starts to perpetuate this and separating people. And so you start to lose a sense of community. Now, historically, this is what they used to do. This is one block in Georgetown, right outside of Washington, D.C., very historic. On this side of the block, these are condos or apartments in some cases, and they're obviously less expensive than the row houses that are on this side of the block. And on this side of the block are detached single-family houses that are more expensive than this guy on the hill. He's a really rich guy. But they're all together on the same block so that when they come and walk down the street, they meet each other on the corner and say hello. And, oh, hi, I know you. Yeah, we work together, right? Or the person who lives here is the school teacher of the kids from over here. Or it's the college-age son or daughter of the people that live here. And so they all live on the block together, and everybody knows each other. The working environment. Most of us spend a good portion of our day in the office. Maybe even more than we spend at home, at least when we're awake. And so here you see kind of a suburban office environment, and this is interesting. You got your parking. This is not a very bad one. Some of the ones that you see in out there in the world are, much larger parking lots and not as much vegetation, et cetera. But what you'll notice is that here in the suburban office experience, let's call this lunch hour. Everybody's out at lunch because there's not very many cars here. And they got in their car, they have 1 hour. They got in their car and they came out and got on that collector that we talked about. And there's probably more traffic. This is an artist rendering, just so you know. And so they get on this road and clog it up, and then they go to, it's Friday, so we'll go to TGI Fridays, right? And we'll live it up. So we're going to put our name on the list, and we're going to wait. We're looking at our watch, and oh my God, I only have an hour, and you have to eat your food, and you have to hurry back, and you hope you get back to your desk. Not a very satisfying experience. And what you see here, again, this is an artist rendering. So they've drawn in a sidewalk and a theoretical pedestrian next to the 18-wheeler, whizzing by him. And so it's quite different than what people used to have. So here, this is an office building, and when these guys have their lunch hour, they just walk downstairs and pick from any of the fabulous restaurants on the street here, and they have actually spare time. And they can go run an errand, and go drop off the dry cleaning or whatever, or just sit on the bench on the sidewalk and ponder the universe, right? And then they walk back to work, and it's a great experience. So quite different. Times have changed. Now, small details are important too. Some of these are bigger ideas, but what you see is things like the curb radius, the turning radius at an intersection, right? In the suburban model, you can see things, 50, 100, 300-foot turning radius around the corner. Now, what that means, and this is a large one, what that means is this guy. And the reason why we have to use this really old picture of this car, a really old car that I'm sure a lot of you, probably had when you're teenagers or whatever, but it's because you can see him actually, the car is leaning with centrifugal force as it goes around the turn. He didn't even have to hit the brakes. He was going so fast. Now you imagine, there's a sidewalk, imagine being a pedestrian standing right there as he whizzes by you, probably 30 miles an hour, I don't know. That's not a pleasant experience. Now in a traditional pattern of development, you would see the tight radius here? A car, even though there's not a stop sign, has to nearly stop to make that turn. They don't have to completely stop, they slow down. This guy can stand here and feel totally comfortable. And in fact, the car might see him and say, oh, after you, proceed, pedestrian. And so he'd walk across the street, and it's great. So people want to walk in places like this. People will walk. Here, people won't walk. This sidewalk is for people whose cars broke down, or people who don't have a car, or some other situation where you can't help but walk. Transportation issues, we've heard a lot about the congestion, as the survey said. And so here, we find it really amusing, because some people said, yeah, there's traffic, but it's not that bad. And so the first thing I said is, where are you from? Because the people who said there's terrible, terrible congestion are the people nearly every single time who are from here for their whole life, right? People from elsewhere who've lived elsewhere in places where there's major traffic jams, they see this and they say, oh man, this is great. I love this. That's why I moved here, because the traffic's not bad. Now, so it's really a perception issue. But we've heard sometimes you have to wait through a couple of cycles of the same light, which is irritating and frustrating. So we'll work on that. But again, that pattern of development where you have to get on this one road that clogs up, there's nothing you can do about that. Widening it's not going to help necessarily. But when you see places like this, look at this. In this one picture, not even take this on purpose. I was just like, oh, cool, and took a shot of this. There's a guy on a bike, person in a car, pedestrians, a tram, and a bus. I'm not going to suggest that we're going to have a light rail transit system in Columbia anytime in the distant future even. It's possible. Who knows? Who knows what can happen? But let's take that out of the equation for the moment. Still, this is what you would call a balanced system. People are getting around in multiple ways. Now imagine if all of these people who were walking all were in their cars. There are these great little images that people have done where you see there's the row of traffic here, and then they've taken all the people out of the cars, moved the cars out of the way, and in the same spot just left the people standing there. And it's only like this big, so all these people, because they're walking, aren't clogging up this road, and all the people who are riding this transit are not clogging up, and then people who are riding their bikes, etc. So there are some things we can do to help balance the transportation issues that we're seeing out there that will hopefully help, and we're going to be looking at that this week with our transportation engineers. So you've heard the whole old expression, it takes a village, right? It takes a village to whatever, raise a child. So this was a village. This is actually new. This was designed and built in 1988, believe it or not, which wasn't a particularly good vintage for development, but these guys did a good job. And you see, houses here, and each one has their roof pitches and whatever is going on. And here, this is the North Dallas Special, sometimes known as a McMansion. And so what's happened is, because we've lost this whole idea of creating a cohesive neighborhood or community, people have had to retreat to their homes. So you have to have the whole village in your home. So here you can see there's the city hall and the steeple of the church, and there's the houses out front. All of it's embedded in one house, right? And not only that, from the outside, you've got your bowling alley and your home theater and everything you could possibly need inside your house. You never have to leave, except for when you have to get in your car in your garage, drive down the highway, go pull in the garage at your office, and go to work. And come, so this sidewalk really isn't all that necessary, except for maybe on the weekends. Now, that's a new invention. It didn't have to be like that. Now, the thing that's so funny about this is incredibly expensive to build. And when you ask people realistically, and you show them images and pictures and stuff, people don't necessarily want all this fussiness going on, all this up and down, ins and outs. The developers, if they really believe that, would love that, because it's way cheaper for them to build it. And then in the end, you start getting places that look more like a traditional neighborhood and historic place, and you have all of the benefits that go along with that. Now, here you can see, this was an ad, a real estate ad from back in the day. Dream big, and you see your suburban neighborhood, and the cul-de-sacs and all that. And I think these are actually canals. They really spiced it up and put these canals in for stormwater drainage probably. And this was left over and meets their open space requirements. So dream big. This is an ad that you would see today. This is a few years old now. Our other option was to put in more pavement. This is to sell real estate in a development. Okay, quite a different concept. There's no house shown. No development at all. There's some change that's going on, because these people, the marketers and all these guys that do these things, they don't just make this stuff up. They don't put this out there if they don't think it's going to resonate with their audience. And so some of these changes that we're seeing, there's the idea, there was for a long time, of this sort of individual. I don't play well with others. I'm going to retreat to my house. I'm going to stay in there. I don't want to see anyone. I don't care about community. And so that was prevalent for a long time, and it's not happening. Here you go. Can you believe the neighbor put that fence up? So I don't know what was going on there. And then this, why walk? Some people are saying, why walk? And he's sitting in traffic, you notice. That's why. So now what we're thinking about is, and we've seen and we've learned, is people need more choices. Because the suburban life that I've just described, that we've called sprawl and shown all these pictures that make it sound so bad, some people love it. Like I said, it's for some people, but it's not for everybody. And if you only offer that's your only choice, it's really not fair. Everybody's saying, oh, well, we live in America. Don't tell me what to do with my property. Right now, everyone's being told you have to live in suburbia. Or in some places like Columbia, where you're fortunate enough to have it, you can pick the historic neighborhoods too, right? So you have two choices here. Now, what we're seeing is that there's this whole other group of people that happen to fall into this group that you're missing in this. Remember, we talked about the demographic studies from the beginning. They're not only in that age group per se, but that age group happens to be particularly heavy in this concept of people who think of themselves as creative. People think of themselves as creative somehow. They may not be an artist. They may not be a sculptor or whatever. They may be a dentist. They may be, an accountant. And they think of themselves as creative in some way, though. I'm going to do the best books you've ever seen. And look at this new way I came up with accounting things, right? So you're creating in whatever their industry is. And a lot of times their preference is to not have their office in a strip mall or in one of the other manifestations or in an office park. They want something a bit more with a bit more character. And so this book came out called Rise of the Creative Class, and it uses this class word, which we have a lot of times people have a negative reaction to. But basically, he's just describing this phenomenon. He realized that there were these people who see themselves like this, but they fit in all groups, all ages, all races, all genders. Anyone can think of themselves as creative, and everyone is creative. Even if you don't yet know you're creative, everyone's creative. And so how do you tap into the creativity of the masses, every citizen, and get that creativity infused in the town, in the city, and wherever you live to make it better? And after he did this, magazines came out. They said, wow, that's true. I never thought about that. And this Fast Company, it's only geared towards this type of person who sees themselves as creative. It's my favorite magazine. I love it. It's the one magazine I have a subscription to besides Urban Farm magazine, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. So again, we look for indicators as to whether or not something's a good idea, whether not just it's a bestseller, but here, this is a real estate office, Cool Space Locator. That's the name of a realty company. So they're out looking. When you're one of these creative people, you want a cool space, you go to these guys. It's kind of like in Nashville, it's the equivalent to Village Realty. They're known for doing all the cool, historic neighborhoods or the Gulch or whatever, all these neat places. So that means it's really happening. Now, what do these people look like? Now, this is an example, not necessarily, we could just put a blue dot over his head and fill in the blank with anybody. But what you see here is he's doing something. Looks like he's just designed a wind turbine. I don't know. And he's in his little workshop here. And he's probably not in an office park. This could be his garage for all we know, right? And he's just come up with something that has now revolutionized energy in the United States and around the world. So he's the guy who's going to start a company. He founded the company, but he's not the only important person. It's not only about white-collar workers, okay? It's also about, here's his wind turbine that has now taken off and has been expanded. It's about the people who know how to fix it and make it and do all of those things with it too. Because one thing we know is that in Columbia, the group of people that you do still have in here is people who have skills, who can do these things, who can make stuff or whatever. They used to be making cars. They used to be doing stuff with phosphate or whatever. So now we basically take those people who have those skills and who want to, choose to, and know how to work with their hands and transform them into green-collar workers, right? So it's a green industry we talk about. And this is happening all over the country. Literally, there's an example. I can't remember the city. I heard it on NPR, and the car factory shut down, and they all went through the program at the local university and learned about how to build windmills. No kidding. And so we're going to be talking about that kind of stuff throughout this process. Now, we study the economics of what's going on because we need to know the current state of what you see in Columbia today, but we also need to be able to look into the future. We can't make predictions. It's just not possible. As best people try. Even our economist is great because he says, we can make predictions in the future, but in the end, it's only questionable as to whether or not it'll come true. But what we want to do is try to be cognizant of it, thinking all the time that we're not just drawing pretty pictures and making plans, that every line we draw has a dollar sign associated with it, okay? So we're drawing things that cost, but we're also drawing things that can help with the economy, that can make money, that can bring people here because of the environment we're going to create through the plans that we draw and through the ideas that you all bring to us and we help you put into words and into plans and into drawings. So here, this is in the Richmond area. They did a document talking about smart growth and smart economics, tying the two together. And you notice every single picture in here is some cool, vibrant place, walkable front porch living, sidewalks. And so they've tapped into it and understand that. Now, not only is economics important, but also is your enjoyment of life, your everyday life, your quality of life, as they call it. This came out about a couple weeks ago, and it said, "How happy is your city?" And MSN did this thing, and they came up with these 10 indicators, and number 9 out of 10 was good urban design. okay? And when they say good urban design, they aren't talking about the first half of the presentation that I just showed you. They're talking about what we're starting to look at now. But I thought that was pretty cool. You know, it's like, okay, we can draw stuff, we can figure out, we can plan, we can create and innovate for the city that will help with the economic situation. And it also make you feel better, make you happier. How about that? That sounds pretty good. So there's preferences that these groups have that you're missing. So this is not where they live. These people that are missing from the city, this is not where they live. They don't want this. They will not buy this. This is not where they work. This is their worst nightmare. This is not where they shop. Now, I could have picked a lot uglier versions of a strip center. This is actually quite, well manicured and well, it's a good representation. They don't go here. They don't go to these places. And this is not where they play. Okay? I had a hard time thinking of where, what a suburban example of place to play is, because playgrounds are not too bad in suburbia. And that guy's name was Brian, actually. Okay, so this is where they live. And look at this, they're totally blocking the sidewalk. That's probably some kind of a violation, isn't it, Norman? That's totally not allowed, but look how happy they are, right? It's worth it, let's just let them do it. Here's where they live. Look at this guy. Yay! He's running around, having fun. This is the world headquarters of the Gap. How about that? That's pretty, I don't know if that fits in Columbia necessarily, but I just want you to see where these creative people work. Look at these green roofs all over the place here. They have walking on the sidewalk, cars and people moving around. This is the Googleplex. This is where Google is and where all the people that work at Google. And what's cool is here you don't see these big parking lots. The buildings face into these kind of this pedestrianized area with parks and things. They have solar panels all over the place. At Google, when you have some personal issue, your wife's mad at you, you got to make a personal call. This is where you go, and then actually you can have some privacy there. This is where you go when you need a break. This is where you go for an impromptu meeting. This is a boat, if you happen to notice that. Okay? This is where you work. This is your workspace. Look at this. Over here, these guys are totally talking. He loves it because he wants to hear them. He's like, oh, God, these guys won't shut up. I put my headphones on, right? It's no problem. This is where they shop, and not just because there's tons of wine here. Look at this. Kids, younger people, great store, candy shop. This is where they eat. Outdoor cafes, outdoor dining, walking areas, all kinds of cool, unique places, local places. And I showed this image. This is really cool. Look at this. Some of the images I showed were like really elaborate and fancy historic architecture. This is concrete cinder block, right? Just painted nicely, but the experience out here, and this is like the best pizza, not in Chicago, even though it's Chicago, but totally good, and they love it. And here they are standing outside, the owner of the shop. Come on in, how's it going? We got some special today, right? It's great. And this is where they play, okay? And you don't have to have the city skyline to have these kind of places for people to play. So this guy sitting here on his front porch is the poster child for one of these people that's missing from the city right now. And he's on his porch, and he's on his laptop, on his high-speed internet that's probably free to the whole city. It's floating around in the air. Everyone can get on it. So the city is a Wi-Fi hotspot, and he's running his multi-billion-dollar business from wherever in the world he wants to live, because he doesn't have to go to an office in a suburban office park. He could be in Columbia, Tennessee, doing that. But he has to pick to live here, because he can live anywhere. So you have to make it a place where he will pick to live. So, back to a little theory for a minute. So we've talked all about this idea of the traditional versus the contemporary or conventional suburban life and development pattern. I'm going to show you what that looks like in diagrammatic form. So on the bottom are these pods of suburbia. So here's your work pod, here's your shopping pod, here's your housing pod, here's your school pod. And so each of these uses, you have to come out, get on the arterial, the collector road, and clog it up. Now on the top, you see a traditional pattern of development you would see in any historic place or new development or new city that is using these concepts. And you'll see the same things down here, up here, but they're distributed in a different way. So you have shopping here in your town center, you have working here, you have homes here, school here. These relate to each other with parks and greens. You have an interconnected network of streets so that you can go from one place to the next in a multitude of ways. If you have, this road's closed for some reason, there's an accident or whatever, you just go around the block the other way. If the EMS or somebody has to come and provide some of their services and help somebody, they're not stuck here. They're not trying to do an 800-point turn to get out because the cul-de-sac is blocked up and turn back around and get out and save somebody's life. So the core fundamental principles are walkable, compact, mixed use, and diverse. So walkable. The average American is willing to walk a quarter of a mile, or roughly 5 minutes, before they will get in their car and drive instead. Okay, so if it's 6 minutes, they're driving. If it's 5, they'll walk because you feel silly driving that short of a distance. Okay, so everything that we do when we're laying stuff out, you'll start hearing about this 5-minute walk, or what we call a pedestrian shed. And you'll see these circles on our plans, and that's related from the center to the edge of how far an average American is willing to walk. You have compact, so that means kind of your average daily needs, hopefully, are within walking distance of your community where you live, your house. So that means you start having things like corner stores and offices in a walking distance, and you start providing that, which you don't currently have in the suburban model. And in addition to that, when you're compact and you are able to not be wasteful in the space that you have, you actually end up saving and preserving open space. You know, you're able to preserve some of that open space that everybody wants in the form of parks and plazas and greens and squares. Mixed use. Mixed use is, that term is used a lot actually, even in suburban development. What they usually mean is horizontal mixed use. So there's the shopping over there and there's the office over there and whatever. Cool Springs is mixed use, right? As a development goes, that's not what I mean. Mixed use in most cases is actually vertical. You have some horizontal as well, but it's mostly vertical. So you have offices and people living above shops, like you would have seen historically in Columbia. Do people live above in downtown? They can. Okay, so so a lot of places we go, they've actually prohibited that, or the building code won't let it because the stairway is like a half an inch too narrow. Oh, so it's wasted. It's storage. So anyway, diverse, that's really a good one because it ends up talking about, and I'll show you in a minute, a mix of housing types, of ages, of incomes, of all types of different types of diversity, which in the end makes a more authentic and livable community, because the best cities that you go to, the most loved, the ones that you go visit on vacation, are about as diverse as you can get. And it adds more interest to it and different points of view and different perspectives. Even though people tend to like to be in areas that they are familiar with, people like them. So getting to that diversity, what that means in this types of living arrangements, this is a mix of housing types, okay? So this is what we call a live-work. So here's a shop on the ground floor, and the owner or a renter or somebody lives above the shop. This is a duplex. You notice there's 2 doors here? It's a duplex. Here, these are row houses or townhouses, depending on where you are in the country. These are apartments. Notice they're next to single-family houses on the same street. I'm not talking about apartment complexes. So we'll talk about apartments throughout the week. When I say apartments, I mean like this. These are condos, okay? Or they could be apartments too. Really, an apartment is really just an ownership or a rental status of a building. It shouldn't be the form, right? Apartment complexes are a form that you associate with apartments, which most people have a negative impression to, rightly so. And then detached single-family houses. Here's a small one, here's a medium one, and here's a really large one, right? And so these all, what you notice, are all compatible one with the next to be on the same street, on the same block, in the same neighborhood. They don't have to be separated in pods by gates and guards and whatever, they can all work together because they relate to the street similarly. They have their setback. They have a planting strip here, usually with street trees. This was kind of new, so they hadn't put the trees in yet. And they all relate, and the form of them is compatible, even though the architectural styles are somewhat different. Now, what happens is, naturally, by having a mix of housing types, you end up having a mix of incomes. So people, have asked us a lot about affordability, affordable housing, etc. It didn't used to be necessary. You didn't used to have to make affordable housing specified and called out as such. It was just that there were enough options of different types of conditions that people could find something that they could afford. Nowadays, it's not like that as much, and so we have to start thinking in a little bit different terms and being much more specific about it. And so what you start to see is this is an affordable unit. It's small, but it's of the quality of the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. It addresses the street in the same way, and it's scattered and mixed in the neighborhood. Instead of taking everybody of one socioeconomic group and sticking them in a big development all together, and all the psychologists and everybody who studied this know that that is not a good environment. That does not help people, and it is not a conducive environment to people thriving in. And so we now know that you mix incomes in developments. Here, this is what's called a Katrina cottage. This was designed as an alternative to the FEMA trailers that were handed out after Hurricane Katrina. The thing that's so cool about it is it costs a little bit more than a FEMA trailer, not much more, but the quality of life of living in this versus one of those little white trailers that we all saw that people got stuck in for 3 to 5 years in some cases is immeasurably different. These things have become so popular that they're actually being used now in private development projects where they want to provide some more affordable options. Lowe's sells this now as a kit. You can buy this on Lowes.com and have it be shipped to your house, and you can build it yourself if you want, or have somebody build it for you. Pretty remarkable. Now here, this is that neighborhood I showed you a minute ago from 1988. Okay, looks pretty awesome though. This house, this is where they used to do affordable housing. This house here, because this is right outside of Washington D.C., was $1 million, even though it's not that it's not gigantic. It's still $1 million house. Here is their garage, and here is an apartment that they rent out for $800 a month. Just behind, their alley runs behind that, and just behind here, this is a row house that sells for $400,000. So $1 million, $800 a month, $400,000, all within the frame of my camera on the corner of one block, and each of them enhances the other's property value. There is no detracting. This house is not worth less than this one because it has a renter out there and it has a townhouse behind it. Because they're compatible in their form and the layout and the way they're set up, they are more valuable because of the diversity. Pretty interesting. That's not what they tell you when you go to a real estate agent normally. Because normally when you have those types of things at those price points that are mixed, they are incompatible in their form and character. And so they're detrimental to one another. Now, mix of uses, another form of diversity. So here I showed you a minute ago the live work. This is kind of these are all similar situations with commercial on the ground floor and office or residential or something above. Except for this one. This does not have anything above it. But what you'll notice is that there are different manifestations of each of these. This is very urban in its character. This is much less so. This is more urban. This is more residential looking. And so the design starts to become important as you start talking about what is appropriate in this community, in whatever community we're working in. What is the character that we want to look at? So the idea is having the mix of uses vertically as well as horizontally throughout the community to add that convenience. Now, sustainability is something that we are going to look at as a real option here. Because a lot of the towns that we work in, especially in the South, that's not at the top of their list of what's important to me, what's my priority. And that's because it's been most often portrayed as some sort of a touchy-feely thing if you want to do right by the earth. But when we start talking about the financial benefits of doing these things and the energy savings and the infrastructure savings, et cetera, people actually start paying much more attention. And what we like to do is start with those things not like the things I'm showing you first, but start with those things that don't really cost much more money. Using nature, and I'll show you that to help with dealing with some of the stormwater issues. But here it is something that costs more money. These are called green roofs. You've probably heard of them. You may not have ever seen them because they're usually on top. But these things can be much utilitarian, just totally just to be green, and they absorb rainwater. They insulate the building, on and on. They have all of these beneficial environmental impacts, or they can be designed as usable space where you can go out and enjoy it, or you can actually grow food on the roof. So pretty bizarre to think about. This is City Hall in Chicago. This is a city who's saying we support sustainability. You know why? Because we have on our roof a green roof. Now, this building is shared by the city and the county. Right behind all these air conditioning units and all this mechanical work up here is the county side. What you can't see is the county decided to opt out of the green roof program. So now the mayor of Chicago takes tour groups up on the roof, and he has this little infrared heat gun, and they go over and laugh at the county. Ha, ha, ha. Look, it's like 20 degrees hotter on his side from here. Look at mine, look at his. And they go make fun of the county because they have done this. And this is them saying, we support sustainability. This is the city taking initiative and doing that. That's pretty bold and progressive, but they did it. Rainwater harvesting, pretty simple. Catching, the rain falls on the roof. Instead of sending it down the stormwater sewer, you capture it, you reuse it, you water your plants, etc. For those of you who have irrigation systems, they can actually tie in your rain barrels or whatever form of storage you have into your irrigation system. So it's not like you have to go out there and hand water stuff, and it's a real pain. They make it very suburbanite friendly. Recycling. That seems like for a long time everybody's been doing. I don't know if you guys do recycling here. In Columbia, we just got it where it's more curbside in Franklin, and it was a long time coming, though. It was a big deal. And here we see that in this community, they actually took it so seriously they had artists. They literally commissioned local artists to design their garbage and recycle cans to make them stand out as prominent. This is in Portland. This is at their farmers market. Recycle it, throw it away, and then let's just say throw it away. It's called waste it. Okay, that's pretty good. And compost it, right? So that's taking it a whole nother level. I asked in a meeting the other night with the young professionals, how many people compost here? Can I see a hands? How many people compost? Good, excellent. It's pretty interesting because it's gotten a bad rap over the years. I started composting recently, and it doesn't stink for those who think it does. That means you're doing it wrong if it stinks. Alternative energy. This is obviously dependent on where you are in the country. If you don't have the ability to generate wind power because you don't have wind, you can't do wind. You have to do what works. You probably have solar, on and on. Obviously, these things cost a little bit more than not doing them, but in the end, the energy benefits and returns over the long term are beneficial. Now, here again, a city supporting sustainability. I don't know if this may be the only electric car recharging station in the whole city, but they have one they can take a picture of and say, we support electric vehicles. They actually just got some in the Whole Foods parking lot in Franklin. There's a couple out there. And so here they're taking that initiative. The LEED certification system, we just worked in the smallest little crossroads, middle of nowhere, right outside of Chicago. They have just a few buildings in town, but the newest building, the police station they built, is LEED Silver certified police station. That means it's met all of these energy efficiency criteria and has gotten this award, which is a big deal. And they decided as a city that was important to them. So we're going to support sustainability and show it in our civic buildings. Now, the thing that's interesting when we talked about these green industries a minute ago and attracting them to the community, they don't come to communities that aren't green. So you have to do these things to start attracting these kind of people and these types of companies. Now, that said, it's also good for you, right? So instead of just giving tax cuts and tax breaks and come on over, we'll give you the land for $1 and all that stuff, which costs you money. It does cost money in the end, because a penny saved is a penny earned, right? So you end up spending money on things that are beneficial for you to help you attract those people. Urban agriculture. This is becoming so prevalent these days. Everybody's now wanted to grow their own food. Not everybody, many, many more people than have in the past. What used to be everybody did it, it was no problem, especially during the whole Victory Garden thing during the wars. And now everybody's wanting to grow their own food, and you're seeing it integrated into new subdivisions. So the farm is now the golf course of the 80s and 90s. Everybody had golf course communities. Now they're doing farming communities. So the houses in the subdivision are built around it, and building communities with farms. And you can see the houses here. And here's a very urban example. This lady has a subscription. She pays like $50 a year, and she gets this little plot, and she can garden in the city. Natural infiltration. This is one of those things I was talking about that doesn't really cost much more money. Like the earth wants to take the water back, right? And we put it in a pipe and send it far, far away. We can actually keep it where it is and put it back in the ground, and it deals with it for you. It cleans it. It makes it where it doesn't flood stuff. So we know how to do that, and we're going to be looking at those kind of ideas as we go through this process. And what we want to do, because when we start talking about it being environmentally sensitive and sustainable and all that, oftentimes it's it's kind of a fight. You have the environmental groups come out and they say, oh, you got to do this and do that. And it's like it's more important to care about the snails and the minnows than it is the humans. We make the natural habitat what it needs to be to perform at peak performance, and the human habitat suffers as a result. So what we try to do is seek balance and harmony between the natural habitat and the human habitat, because we are part of nature as well, and we have rights and places to be. Now, when you start talking about how do you make all of these things a reality, and what does the physical form start to look like? I mentioned character so many times now, you're probably tired of hearing about it, but it becomes really important, because instead of the old way of zoning things with the uses, separating the uses, now we zone things based on the character and the form, okay? And so when we look at the planning process here, the ideas that are going to be embedded in the plan will be moving that idea forward. What we see is, when you think about the natural environment, usually you stop where humans start. The pictures you see, the drawings, whatever, you stop. Well, what we've done is actually picked up this would be the natural zone, right? So each of these zones here, let's call them character zones. Technically, from a planner jargon, we call them transect zones. That's just a techie word, but let's call them character zones, right? So instead of T-zone, this is a C-zone, okay? So here we have the natural. This is where you don't do anything. This is preserved. This is the nature where you really don't. You go out there and you have trails maybe at best. So there's a lake or whatever, and you do that. The river area along the river would be a good example. Then you get into the rural zone, where you start to see some human intervention, and that'll be agricultural areas, farmsteads. As you come into town, you see lots of examples of these. And here's each of these pictures on the bottom correlates to the zone it's in. The suburban zone, okay, just to confuse everyone, we've been talking about the suburban, the ills of the suburban development format, but here we wanted to use the same kind of nomenclature. So this suburban, we'll call it suburban zone. And here, that's what most people are used to, a larger lot with a larger house set back farther from the street. The roads are a bit more curvilinear, and you can see that these are definitely recognizable forms that you'd see anywhere in a beautiful historic neighborhood. The fourth zone is the general urban zone, and that's where you start getting into some attached row houses, some smaller detached single-family houses with still a mix. This is kind of the most versatile zone. It's got kind of a little bit of everything in it, which happens to be what you see in some of the most interesting places, because it's got a lot of cool stuff going on. But then you also start to have some commercial stuff, some of the corner stores, the convenience. So here's like a corner laundry. This has a little shop on the bakery on the ground floor. And I know you can't see it, and I wish all the wizardry I have in the slideshow I could have zoomed in, and I don't know why I didn't. This is actually the original Walmart. This is Sam Walton's 5 and Dime in Arkansas on their little main street in this T4 or C4 zone. So it's pretty interesting to think about that context, so where Walmart came from. The fifth zone, getting more urban, more attached, typically taller buildings. You can start to see it kind of steps up higher. Primarily, nearly always commercial on the ground floor of some sort of retail. The sixth zone, I didn't even show pictures because I don't want to scare you to death. Because there, it's getting into like downtown Nashville and Manhattan and whatever, and it's pretty urban. And you guys may say, oh, why are you stopping? We want some of that sixth zone, But typically, from what we've seen around town so far and what we've heard from people, I can't imagine thus far that that's the character you're looking for. So, but anyway, you get the idea. It gets more intense, more urban. And then we have these assigned districts, these special districts. And that's for things that can't easily fit into the idea of a walkable network of streets, things that are bigger, like a college campus or the hospital, for instance. The hospital would be a special district. And so there's specific recommendations and requirements that would go along with that to make sure that we met the needs of that, the hospital or whatever the user might be. Oh, look at that. I did zoom in a little bit. So there's the hospital. Now, don't be confused. We're not talking about putting lipstick on the pig. When we're talking about this character stuff, this is not about just beautifying things. I'm not talking about, more plants or putting trees in the parking lots of the, whatever they've got cut down. We're talking about dreaming big, okay? And so I'm about to show you some examples of some true and proper boulevards around the world, some in the United States and some not. These are boulevards. This is in Boston. This is Commonwealth Avenue, some of the highest property values in the entire city. You have, here you see bike lanes, you see parking lanes, you see driving lanes, street trees along it. Here you can see, this is one we used on this postcard and the posters that we've sent around town all over the place. And these places are in some of the most visited and most loved parts of their cities that they're found in. The best shopping, the best dining, all of that stuff. Now, for the most part, most of these are historic, okay? That's because they used to really know how to do it well. Some, though, today are being built new or being retrofit from a suburban strip highway to a beautiful and grand boulevard. And so that's what we're going to be looking at this week. So I'm going to show you some microscopic examples here of, we talked about the parking and stuff not being in the front, and so you say, well, how in the world can you do that if you've got some like a oil change place or a, whatever? This is an oil change place. Here you go. This is the back, this is the front. You drive in here, here's the bays, you can't see them. This is a store on the ground floor, here's a tire place, so they're related, and the sidewalk here. All of those auto-oriented uses are in the back, okay? It can happen. This is what that can look like on a larger scale. So here you see all their parking's in the rear. You see their shops and things. So you still are providing tons of parking for these uses. We have, I think this may have been a hospital actually. So you see the drop off in the back. You guys have an example of this already in the bank, right? As you're coming into downtown. The drive-thrus are all in the back, if you noticed. They have a little teaser parking out front, but the drive-thrus are in the back. So it's possible to even do it here. We have a model for gas stations. We call gas backwards. So the gas pumps are in the back and the convenience stores out on the corner at the street. This is an example because one thing we heard, if you do anything in Columbia, please, for heaven's sakes, fix the mall, okay? This is an example of a place called Mashpee Commons up in the Northeast, up in New England. This was the old mall there in town, really not even as nice looking as the one you have here. And this is what it is today. They transformed this mall into this walkable, vibrant, mixed-use village. It's a center in that community. It's amazing. People love it, and you get the best stores. So, oh man, wouldn't you know it? So we changed the name. Everybody kept beating me up about this 2050, right? So it says the Boulevard 2050 and tomorrow. Okay, so that's our new name. Nothing too cutting edge, but just so you know, we listen, and we haven't just this is the kickoff of the whole thing. So we've listened already.